Good morning or afternoon, depending on where everybody is at. I really appreciate each of you guys taking the time to come attend today's conference, and I really want to thank the SBOA as well for hosting. We really appreciate everything that they do for the industry, and we are incredibly excited to be a part of today's event, as per usual. So my name is Matt Beal, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Storable. For folks that aren't familiar with Storable, we are a technology company that focuses exclusively on the self-storage industry. And we provide a kind of a unique all-in-one platform solution that includes facility management software, marketing websites, a storage marketplace for storage shoppers to locate facilities, tenant insurance, payment processing, among some other services as well. And so some of our legacy brand names that you might recognize are SiteLink, StoreEdge, Easy Storage Solutions, StoreSmart, or SpareFoot. And my role at Storable in particular, product marketing manager, is to have conversations with clients and operators to really best understand how we can help solve your unique business challenges, whether it's making adjustments to our existing products and services to better meet your needs, or coming up with brand new features and capabilities. And so through this kind of wide variety of conversations I'm having on a regular basis, today's topic of simplifying and automating processes really came to life. And so before we get into that, though, I want to set the stage for, again, kind of how this topic came about and why we invested in this. So, as we settle into this kind of new normal of COVID-19, and kind of pardon the overused phrase at this point, but a lot of operators seem to be discussing what was the lasting impacts that we were going to see of this health crisis in the industry. And we wanted to help the industry by telling our best interpretation of that story. So we partnered with the Radius Plus team to give a sort of state of the industry from a 50,000-foot view. If you're not familiar with Radius Plus, they are the leading market intelligence platform for self-storage industry. So if you need anything, whether it's you're evaluating new properties or curious kind of what your competition is doing in the area, I would highly recommend you check out their products and services. They're great people. They make a great product. But I want to walk you through kind of a brief, condensed version of that story now. So in 2013, 14, and 15, operators were seeing unprecedented revenue and NOI growth. And so naturally, this attracted a lot of developers that were taking advantage of being able to build at like a 9 or a 10 cap rate and sell those stabilized facilities at a 6 cap rate. And you can kind of see the impacts of that in the top right chart here, that construction value put in place chart. It's a really big spike around 15. And as a result of that, we've been witnessing the largest development cycle in the industry's history from 2015 to 18, where we're adding almost 1,000 new builds every single year. But starting in 2019, really towards the tail end of it, we started to see that consumer demand wasn't quite keeping up with that growth in supply. And so operators have kind of had to start figuring out how they can be more efficient with both their operations and marketing efforts. And the COVID-19 health crisis really only further accelerated that trend. But we don't believe any of this is doom and gloom. I mean, I think as we all know, really, 6-7 months into this health crisis, the self-storage industry has continued to perform incredibly well relative to many other industries. But there were some challenges that remain and continue to remain. And so based on those conversations that I was alluded to earlier with clients and other vendors in the space and some subject matter experts in the industry, we wanted to create a framework that articulated what was at the core of how each of these, in particular the most savvy of operators we work with, were approaching optimizing both their operational and marketing performance. And so we called this framework the 4 operator imperatives. And so again, the goal is to assist operators to put their business in a position of strength coming out the other side of the health crisis. How can you kind of look around those corners and make sure that you're prepared to continue to succeed as well as succeed right now? So I want to take a look at those imperatives real quick. And so the first one is optimizing your marketing spend. And so the idea here is that operators should be evaluating their usage of all kinds of marketing services and tools like SEO and PPC, listings management, reputation management, to ensure that you're using the most cost-effective marketing techniques to drive demand where you really need it. And so this one is particularly interesting as we see kind of more and more customers preferring to engage with businesses in digital formats. And that's something we've seen as a result of the health crisis. We'll be talking a little bit about that in today's presentation as well. And the next one was rethinking the tenant experience. And so again, your customer behaviors are shifting. They're preferring more and more digital forms of engagement. And so it's important that you provide them with experiences that meet their needs. Whether it's online reservations and move-ins or self-service account management, multi-channel tenant communications, there's a wide variety of experiences here that operators should be considering to again, meet the needs of their tenants, the preferences of their tenants. And then for the operator imperative we're going to be focusing on today, which is simplifying and automating your processes. And so in particular, what we'll be discussing is kind of how you can free yourself and your team up to focus on driving value back to your business in a variety of other ways. And so more to come on this in just a moment. And the last is amplifying your operating revenue. And so the idea is here that there is a number of valuable, non-rental revenue streams, whether that's products or services, that operators can provide tenants that create both an excellent experience for them and again, create an ancillary revenue stream for you and your company. Well, let's get into today's topic. So I personally don't think anybody has done a better job of articulating the impact of COVID-19 on specifically consumer behavior better than Satya Nadella. He's the CEO of Microsoft. And in an earnings call early in the quarantine, I believe it was either the last week of March or early in April, he said that, we've seen 2 worths of digital transformation in 2 months. And I think what's so noteworthy about this statement is really what's implicit here is that there's a permanence. We've seen shifts in behavior that we believe are here to stay. And we need to make sure that as an industry, we're prepared for it. And another illustration of this came from Bain & Company, which shows the transition towards more digital forms, specifically in the shopping space. And in the last several months, we've seen 18% more growth than we expected based off of historical growth rates. And this isn't just companies like Amazon's, the big players that are, dedicated to virtual spaces. This is across all industries. So you can only imagine what it's like for someone like Amazon. But even in our industry, which is, kind of been laggard compared to most industries in this space, we are seeing these massive shifts, which leads us to what we've seen here at Storable. And so with our SpareFoot product, if you're not familiar, again, this is a storage marketplace where tenants can go find storage units that meet their needs. We track a number of data sets that give us visibility into what's happening across the industry in aggregate. And so we've seen that after the shock of COVID-19 in March and April, customer traffic has increased pretty significantly, about 20%, which is pretty in line with that Bain & Co. stat that I was just referring to. And that's compared to last year. That's year-over-year growth. And so even as we've seen restrictions become more laxed, this pattern of people shopping online has continued to increase. And you can kind of see that in the last couple months. This chart is just a little bit outdated. We don't have October data in here, but it is very consistent, just about 18% year over year as well. So it seems to be consistently growing. And we've also heard anecdotally from our clients that things like online reservations and move-ins are also both up. And so this seems to be a trend across the board. But the natural question is kind of what happens next? Are we going to see people return to their shopping and engagement behaviors from before the health crisis? Most experts are saying no. And in our industry in particular, we kind of here at Storable suspect that, yeah, we might regress a little bit back more towards those behaviors because, again, this industry is notorious for things like walk-up traffic and kind of older forms of engagement. But we do think that digital is going to be significantly more so here to stay than it would have been if you were to just say 2019 before the health crisis and all of this kind of forced us into those digital forms of engagement. And so this kind of fundamentally changes the way we need to think about our operations. And so with digital forms of engagement, there are opportunities to engage with shoppers one-on-one, but there's also quite a number of opportunities where we need to create self-service capabilities. And also kind of what is sometimes deemed as a dirty word in the industry, which is automation. And so the reality, though, is automation is key in accommodating these new consumer needs in a digital environment. And in my opinion, one of the biggest kind of misnomers in the industry is that automation is something you either completely go into or you don't do any of it. And I personally believe that that's a false choice. There's definitely a lot more nuance, a lot more complexity in that decision. And so there's an opportunity for you to think about incremental automation and how it can help you increase the efficiency of your operations and save money while delivering a better customer experience across the board. And so what I want to talk to you about today is this idea that kind of as you increase in technical maturity, you have an opportunity to drive increased efficiency as well. And that's kind of what you're seeing on the x-axis versus the y-axis here on this chart. And on the left side of the continuum, there's a group of folks that are really mostly using pen and paper today. Maybe they're using a bit of spreadsheets or Outlook, but they're not using any form of automation. And by contrast, on the right side, we have people that are, this group of operators that is running fully unmanned facilities. Every task from beginning to end is handled without a human on site. But the reality is there's a gap, a pretty big gap in between those two. And this gap is something that we call practical automation. And so most folks on this call are probably already committing to a few of the items under this practical automation umbrella, just by virtue of you joining a virtual trade show. I'm pretty confident in that. But each person is at a unique stage of it. And so these items are things that help improve the customer experience while preserving your time. And we're going to spend today discussing kind of what fills in this gap and where can you take those steps. So let's take a look at the 5 items we're going to be discussing today. The first is self-service tenant transactions. And it's important to make sure that customers can engage with you in a way that they prefer that also makes sense for your operations. The second is auto-generated marketing ops and financial reporting. And right now, a lot of the folks that we talk to, that we work with specifically, they're spending so much of their time chasing down disparate sources of data to understand how their facilities are performing. And this is a real drag, definitely a significant time sink. And so we're going to be discussing how you can kind of alleviate that time sink momentarily. The third is self-service reservations and move-ins. And this is probably something that a good number of you are doing today, especially probably directly resulting from the health crisis. And so we're going to be taking a closer look at what this actually looks like and means, including how it can drive efficiency for you. And then the fourth is probably where I'm going to be challenging you the most today. We're going to be talking about how you can utilize communications effectively to reduce the burden on your operational staff, while at the same time creating a better tenant experience. And then finally is this topic of variable rate management or revenue management or yield management, depending on the exact phrasing that you've heard before, but they're all kind of the same idea. And so this is another kind of potential dirty word to operators, but we're going to be discussing how you can utilize it to discern, really the optimal rates that you should be charging for your various units at your facility, and then ultimately, optimizing your revenue streams as well. And so one last overarching concept we're going to be discussing really throughout all 5 of these buckets is, one of the most common things we hear from operators when they hear automation, and maybe they're a little scared of it or they're not sure how to get started, is that they're afraid they're going to be removing the human element of these interactions. Because folks often see the human element of their operations as a competitive differentiator. And so I think that's an entirely appropriate fear and one we are going to discuss, but I want to make it very clear that the intent of all of the concepts we'll be discussing today are intended to augment your staff and not replace them. We agree that your staff should be a competitive differentiator. And so what we'll be talking about is as we drive more efficiency and your team gets more and more time freed up in the day, that they really are opened up to go focus on providing that valuable experience to your customers. And so in theory, you can actually make the human element stronger by implementing automation. And so with that being said, I want to dive into today's first concept, which is self-service tenant experiences. And so, as I mentioned, there are a number of things that folks are likely, that you probably already have the ability to do with your current technology configuration, but it's really just a question as to whether or not you're putting it into practice. And so the first bucket I want to talk about is online payments. And so we know that a number of tenants shopping digitally is increasing. We just discussed that. But it's important to note that we're also in one of the few industries where in-office payments have historically been higher than expected. And so as a result of COVID, we've seen this number go down dramatically. And customers are shifting more and more towards making credit card payments, or even our second bucket here, which is automatic payments. And so taking that a step further, this is something we definitely think you should be considering. A lot of operators we talk to are discussing this concept of a gold star move-in. And what they mean by that is that they're taking, that each customer is taking advantage of each of the facility's offerings, whether that's including, insurance, auto pay, or ancillary kind of, professional services, whatnot. And so why do you think that is? And in my opinion, it's that, managing these transactions can be a really large pain for operators. And so you spend so much of your time chasing down payments or, trying to call people back who are just trying to do something along those lines. And so, why not make this an automatic process for tenants? And so, the experience is clearly better for both you and them. And then lastly is online documents. And so, some of the most common places where we hear operators spending their time are, again, handling payments. Number two is probably gate access. And there's definitely a lot of opportunities for you to automate those. But a close third would have to be processing or managing documents. And so many vendors across the industry today are already offering the online management of documents. There's quite a few facility management software solutions out there that will give you these types of solutions out of box. But what we found is that a lot of operators just haven't really taken the time to properly configure it or really take it to its kind of logical conclusion. And so if you do, so for example, maybe you integrate these types of things into automated communications where you can trigger automatic emails for people to sign various documents or leases. This can be a really huge time save for operators, and you can ultimately empower your customers to manage it themselves online. And for example, this is something where maybe an excellent customer experience. Your manager doesn't need to be on the phone actually to do this. This is something that they'd much rather just get an email and manage it themselves, so that you can focus on providing them an experience where it's more valuable. And so next up, I want to discuss auto-generated marketing, ops, and financial reporting. And so I've built a framework here that's kind of based on a distillation, again, of many of the conversations from clients in terms of how they're thinking about their reporting and what their needs are and how they're going to meet those. And so in those conversations, we've been talking a lot about, again, how much time that they're spending chasing down raw data, this access column here. And they have to compile it in either Tableau or Excel just to be able to get a clear rendering of the information. But if you can't access that information to start, it can be really tricky and time consuming to get to that point where you can interpret or act on it. A lot of people don't even necessarily know how to tie a whole bunch of disparate data sources. You shouldn't have to, in our opinion. This is something, again, that automation should be able to take care of. And so the real goal is, how do you get the systems in place to automatically give you access to the data that you can spend, so that you can spend that time instead just interpreting and coming up with a plan for acting on your data. And so again, in our opinion, you can even take this a step further, is that you should look at all three of these in the context of one another. So for example, you should be able to get this data in front of anybody who needs to help, making critical decisions, or your financial stakeholders, or anyone, without spending all this time manually marrying a bunch of data sources together. And so next up is self-service reservations and move-ins. And so this one is probably going to be the most common sense of everything we talk about today, especially as a result of the health crisis. We've seen quite a few people enabling online move-ins that weren't doing it before then. But it is an item worth discussing. And so kind of, again, as we move more and more towards these digital forms of engagement, there's going to be a number of different lead sources than what we've historically experienced. And you see kind of the most, 5 of the most common ones here. So we've got, paid search, which is like Google PPC type stuff. There's also Bing and some other ones, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll just be talking about Google today. You've also got organic search, or SEO. So you need to be making sure that your site is discoverable online. You've also got the map pack. For those that are not familiar with this, that's the little map that pops up on Google searches that's in between the SEO and the paid search, and it'll show your facility right on the map. And as you might imagine, especially in self-storage, this location piece is critical. People don't want to go drive 15 miles across town to store their stuff. And so the map pack is a great way for you to be discovered as well. And then you also have storage marketplaces such as Sparefoot, where customers are connected with the facilities that best meet their needs. And then lastly is direct traffic. And so this one's a little bit convoluted. There's a number of ways that you can get to direct traffic, but any sort of way that somebody might find your site directly. Maybe you handed them a business card that has the website or whatnot. And so all of these leads eventually lead into your website though, right? And so when people are shopping and starting to make the decision about where they want to reserve or move in, they need to be able to do that very quickly and very easily. And you can do that in 3 ways. One is by making an online reservation. 2 is that they can straight go up to, or like go all the way through the process by completing an online move-in. Or they might see the phone number on your website and they might pick up the phone and give you a call. And so either one of the top 2 ways, you're capturing critical information and pushing that customer through the conversion funnel. But if you're not offering online reservations or move-ins, then you're probably going to be losing out on a significant number of people who are probably going to bounce off of your website and locate another facility that does, because not everybody wants to pick up the phone and call. Especially we found in the younger generations, they prefer digital forms of engagement. So it's really important that you're offering that to capture all the potential tenants. And then the next one is going to be this channel agnostic event driven communication, which is a mouthful, but I promise it's not nearly as complex as what it sounds. So, as I've mentioned before, I personally believe that automated communications is probably the most overlooked set of capabilities of all the ones that we'll be discussing today. There are people that have set up a small number of these, or maybe they've halfway set a few of them up, but I think this is a really big opportunity for operators. And so one of the ways I like to think about this is again, I've built another grid view here, but the idea is that recognizing that there's two different things to look at. One is the medium that we use to communicate with customers, but also the way that we actually engage with them once we have them. And so looking at it that way, there are three main ways to kind of mediums to engage with them. One is email, two is text, and three is physical mail or mail house. And so all of these are incredibly important, but they have different uses and different times that you might want to use them. And the usage isn't the same for all the operators. So we kind of need to evaluate them one at a time and figure out what makes the most sense for each of us. And the way to do that, in our opinion, is by looking at the ways that you can engage with them, which is mass communication, event-driven, which is something like maybe someone completes an online move-in, or if maybe they become delinquent, then you automatically can communicate with them via one of these ways. Or two-way communications, which is absolutely critical, where you're able to answer any questions from your customer. And this is a great opportunity for you to lead, again, heavily into that kind of human element of communications and separate yourself from the competition. And so I was alluding to this earlier, where a lot of people are afraid that they're going to lose the human element. Communications is a great way to have automation while still being on the other end of that line, especially in these two ways. And as you start to evaluate each cross-section of this graph, the reality is there are solutions available for all of 9 of these sections, right? But one area where it's tough to do two-way communications is mail house or physical mail. It can be done, obviously, but it's not something we necessarily see in practice as a business. So we won't spend a lot of time talking about that today. But if you're not taking advantage of these other options, again, there are so many solutions available in the market. Most of them are through facility management softwares, and so if you're missing if you've got an X in one of these categories today, I'd highly recommend you check out how you can make that happen with your facility management software today. And then last is variable rate management. And so as I mentioned before, there's quite a few names you might hear for this out in the industry, whether it's variable rate management, revenue management, or yield management. And unfortunately, these phrases can oftentimes be seen, again, as kind of a dirty word. And in my experience, I believe that to mostly be a misunderstanding of kind of what it can and should be used for. Taking cues from what we see, for example, in the airline or the hotel industry, where this is a little bit more normalized, you see rates increase and decrease based on demand at any given time. Whether you're trying to buy a last-minute ticket or 1-3 months in advance, you're going to see very different prices for that same flight. And we have an opportunity to do that same concept, to do that as well. And so the idea is that you can use occupancy, typically occupancy, as an indicator for demand, and then set your rates based off of that. So for example, when occupancy is high, you know that you're commanding a premium in the market, and you should be able to raise your rates up a bit. Alternatively, when occupancy is low, you're probably going to need to decrease your prices to incentivize tenants to pick your facility. There's a pretty good chance that if your occupancy is low, people are finding one of your competitors who is charging a more affordable price, and you need to make sure that you're staying competitive there. And there's a wide variety of ways that you can approach this, including further segmenting your pricing approach based on things like amenities, for example, like this unit type section. And so, for example, maybe your climate controlled units are selling well, but your non-climate controlled are falling behind. There's probably a good chance you should be considering adjusting your pricing on the non-climate controlled units and bringing it down so that you can incentivize more and more people to use that if they don't actually need the climate controlled service. And also by evaluating the attributes of your tenants is kind of the last way to explore this. And so we've seen some people be pretty creative here, but just for the sake of simplicity, for example, you might have tenants that have been with you for 2 years that are paying the exact same amount that they did on day one. However, that same unit, if you were to rent it to someone off the street, has probably gone up at least 15, 20, maybe even 30%. And so you need to make sure that on an ongoing basis, you're keeping an eye on this to ensure that your existing tenant base is paying competitive market rates. And so this variable rate management, all it does is everything we just discussed, it'll automatically handle those things for you. You kind of put in the triggers and the things that you want it to watch, and what at certain points, like for example, when your occupancy hits 90%, maybe you want to raise your prices, and your software will automatically increase it by a certain percentage over time to be able to, again, find the right rate out there on the market. And so one thing I really want to make clear as we tie off on this is that, each of these items works together with your staff. Again, we don't believe that this is here to replace your staff. It is here to make them more efficient so that they can focus on providing value back to your business in a host of other ways. But most importantly, we do not believe that this is, going to result in a loss of the human element, right? And if anything, it strengthens it. And so as you think about progressing through this maturity curve, we believe operators will need to unlock this type of efficiency, again, especially as those customer needs and those preferences are changing. And so I want to leave with you with a few takeaways today. And so the first is full automation. We don't believe that this is right for every operator or tenant. It can be a very complex beast, and maybe you just don't, maybe you got into the self-storage industry as more of a long-term investment and you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on your daily operations. No problem, right? That probably doesn't make a lot of sense for you. And so we think it takes a very specific operator for this to be a right solution. We believe that the space of practical automation is a much more natural space to be playing in for most operators out there. And the reason for that is that we believe practical automation can help you achieve higher amounts of efficiency, again, while preserving or even amplifying the human element, which again, we know is at the heart of every great storage operation. And then lastly is practical automation can support your team to improve both the tenant and staff experience. And so again, that's where we believe the secret sauce is and why you should be investing in this. And that concludes my presentation for today. So Kara, I wanted to hand it over to you. Did we have any questions that came in throughout the presentation? And if not, you guys are more than welcome to throw a few in here right now as well.
We have not had any questions come in yet.
Okay. I will give you guys just a few moments. Anything I can answer for you guys?
So Matt, one of the things I've seen come across related to this subject in a number of different virtual events that I've been participating in with all the different state associations is you did mention the millennial generation. Obviously, self-storage is something that all generation uses. So how do you, what's your recommendation, I guess, for those folks that older people who are not comfortable using technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you're going to get me on them. I'm going to do my best to not get off on a tangent because I do love this question. I think that demographics in general is something that is maybe a little bit misunderstood when it comes to the self-storage industry. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent and then I'm going to come back and answer your question directly. But one thing I would say, Kara, that has been so phenomenal, at least I'm speaking from personal experience, but I can't tell you how many people I've heard say something like this, is think how many people who didn't even know how to start a FaceTime call are now using Zoom on a laptop, throughout just to stay sane during this health crisis and stay connected to people that they can't see in person. Or how many Amazon boxes have been coming inside your apartment or your house or your condo or whatnot that, even people that weren't using Amazon before all of this started. And so this whole idea of, the older generations not being able to potentially utilize all of the technology that you might offer, you might be surprised, right? I think we've all been surprised over this last 6 to 9 months of how many people are adopting those solutions. And so that's kind of my broader point. But what I would say to answer your question directly, Kara, to kind of rephrase it there is, for those folks that do have that experience, whether they are an older or a younger generation, frankly, doesn't really matter. How can you guide them and help them and use those? I think this is what is such the beauty of automation, again, is that it frees you up to be spending your time in ways that make the most sense for your business. You're not doing the daily mundane tasks anymore because they're automated. And so, for example, if you have someone who does, pick up the phone and maybe you're only doing online movements, maybe you're one of those facilities that still doesn't have the office open. No big deal. If you have someone that can hop on the phone, now that person could be spending that time walking them through how to go online and sign a lease and do the online move-in and really provide them a great experience and teach them how to do something they didn't even think that was capable of doing. So, that's going to be a wow moment. That's going to be someone that's going to be really excited to be working with you, even if it's not maybe the ideal way they would have preferred to do business. I'm sure they're going to understand during this time. And so that's just one of a slew of many ways that you can instead be spending your time doing that instead of, for example, sending out 18 delinquency emails manually by hand, right? That's just something that we shouldn't be spending our time on. So.
Good point. Good answer. Any other questions, folks? You can jump on screen too with us.
We're friendly.
We don't bite.
Yeah, guys, please get your questions in if you have any. I think one other common one I hear just on this topic is for revenue management. I think that one probably scares people off the most because I think a lot of people think that it just means raising prices, which is true to a degree. There are times when you probably should be raising prices. For what it's worth, even with revenue management, you can opt to not do that part of it and only have prices decrease whenever your occupancy is too low, for example. But what I would say is that if this is something that you wanted to dip your toes in and you're worried that you're going to make a bunch of waves or you're going to scare your tenants off or make them move out of the facility by increasing their prices, one of the things we always recommend to do is, again, this is an automated process for in-facility management software, so you can set the percentage increase that your customers are going to get. And so maybe if you have tenants that are 20, 30, 40% below, because again, it's been a couple years that they've been renting with you and you've never upped their prices, then just try to up their prices by a little bit, just like a percentage or two, and just see what people think. There's no reason for you to make up that 20 or 30% gap just because you realized it today. You can definitely take a little bit at a time and just do a couple of 2%, maybe every 3 or 4 months until you start finding the prices that feel right for customers that aren't, upsetting them. And so that is something that most softwares will allow you to do, is to take that very gradually.
It does look like we have a question from Kurt. Hi, Kurt.
Hey, Kurt.
So he says, Matt, Sparefoot now offers the ability to offer direct move-in via SiteLink. How is the process confirming the renter is who they say they are? Is the system providing the new customer with an access code so they can access the property after hours? Can we opt out of providing the customer with the access code if the rental is after hours?
Yeah, so this is a great question, Kurt. And for the other folks in the room, Kurt is one of our SiteLink customers. I think that's kind of evident based off his question. But a couple things here. So I think there's a lot of vendors in the facility management software space that are also doing kind of some of these similar things. So I want to talk about this question in a little bit more higher order, but I will answer your questions directly about SiteLink and Sparefoot as well in there, Kurt. So one is, as Kurt mentioned, as soon as the COVID-19 health crisis hit, we built this capability for Sparefoot to complete an online move-in, to complete straight so that someone can automatically, process their payment and all of that directly from the Sparefoot website and push it into the SiteLink system. And so we actually do not directly confirm anybody's identity throughout that process, Kurt, but what we've seen operators do to be able to address that is to use SiteLink to be able to complement this process with automated communication. So we talked about that a minute before. So for example, when an online move-in hits your SiteLink software, you can have that trigger an automated email that, for example, asks them to provide a copy of their driver's license, for example. That's one way that we see people confirm their identity. And so what we don't want to do is be prescriptive about how folks do that, but what we try to do is provide them the tools to do it in a way that makes sense for their business. And so that's just one example of how some folks have done that. As for your question about access codes, yes, that is also something that is possible via automation and SiteLink and the Sparefoot move-in process. Same idea. Once a move-in hits your SiteLink software, you can automate the processing of sending out a gate code depending on who you're using there. And to your point, yes, you can opt out of providing that in specifically a case of, for example, maybe you want to do that if they go from your website because you have some sort of identity verification and process. But maybe you don't want to do that when it comes from Sparefoot. This is something that you can configure in your software as well. So. And then,
Kurt, Go ahead, Matt.
Yep, I was about to read the same one you were. So is SiteLink able to send the new customer an e-sign rental agreement, which must be completed before the rental process is completed? Yes, so same idea, Kurt. So we configured that via automation after the fact. So once somebody, an online move-in gets triggered, then you can automatically send any sort of rental agreement that you have in your documents configured. So, a lot of times people have different agreements that are outside of just your lease. Maybe you have a couple other ones. You can configure for those to automatically be emailed over to the tenant as well. That is something you can do.
Do we use DocuSign for that, or some form of that, or?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact. Well, SiteLink itself actually sends the documents out. I'm not sure of the exact technical configuration behind the scenes. I'm going to get out over my skis if I talk about exactly what the thing is there. But that is something if you guys.
Let me rephrase my question. Do they send it back through some sort of software so that it's secure, or do they take a photo of that and send it back?
Yeah, no, it is all browser based, so they will be able to sign it straight from the email itself. There won't be any sort of manual complementary process there.
DocuSign to me is kind of like Kleenex tissue,
Yeah, good for them, right? Everyone knows their brand name. And we had another question come in from Manager Zen. Says, I went to the competition to check out online renting. I got into the facility and raised the door, and there was so much dirt on the floor. I could have wrote my name in this. How embarrassing. I did not like that. Yep, I would agree with you. I definitely, hey, just to plug it again, I think what's so great about, again, the automation piece is, your managers can be spending their time in a host of ways. It can be a lot of manual things that you can automate. One of the most common ways we hear is, people using their time whenever they free that up is things like cleaning the facility, or, focusing on getting the merchandise in order and stocked up and keeping the office look nice. Or in this case, cleaning the units, touring the facility, making sure everything's in line. So that's another good opportunity here for automation to help out there.
Yeah, I like that you touched on the human element. I've heard a lot of different folks talking about automation and taking away, with contactless move-ins, taking away the opportunity to have that human touch and human interaction. And I do think there are a number of things that can be done. I was just on another session, and they were talking about with contactless move-in, for example, it's important to have your implementation and your procedures in place in order to do the contactless move-in, but it's also important to follow up and make sure you're making those phone calls the next day, and you can still have that human dialogue.
Totally. Yeah, and I think if any questions come in, guys, I'm more than glad to answer them. While we're waiting, though, I'll tell a quick anecdote that right along those lines, Kara. One of our larger clients that uses storage software in particular, they run entirely unmanned facilities. Surprisingly, they don't use any sort of kiosks, so like you would traditionally think with an unmanned facility. And the reason is, to your point, and to what I was alluding to earlier, is the human element, even for an unmanned facility, they see as one of their more key differentiators in the ways that they can, meet their consumers where they want to shop and provide them a good experience. So you might ask, okay, well, how do you do that with an unmanned facility? So even for these folks that are entirely unmanned, they are utilizing, it is a kiosk in a sense, but it is essentially just a video terminal that when you walk in, the security cameras on the outside of the building see someone walking in, and they will start a call on these video terminals inside of the office. So when you walk in the office, there is a person that is on video chat, just like we are right now, that is there to greet you and to walk you through the process and how to rent the unit, and how are you going to get your lock, and where do you go to, do X, do Y, do Z. And they're providing a human element without actually having a person on site. And so they do have people helping with that, but that one person at scale can potentially be, manning 3 or 4 of these video terminals, right? They only have a handful of people that are managing many, many more facilities. And so they get kind of a win of an efficiency at scale while, again, preserving the human element. And that's even for an unmanned facility. So I think that's pretty noteworthy.
I love that. So it's an actual human that's interacting.
Yep.
It's not robot or whatever, a bot,
Yep.
a chat bot, what they call them.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I get it. So that person could be working from home and managing 5 different stores in different locations.
Exactly.
Just,
yep.
That's using technology to be efficient.
Yeah, I thought that was so creative. I love that example.
Yeah, I do too. I hadn't heard that one before. Well, folks, do we have any more questions? And Zin, you're absolutely welcome, addressing your concerns about the dirty floors. It's 1:12. We've got, I think this goes until 1:15, but we can tell more stories or do a tap dance or have Penny come on and say hi to everybody.
So she finally went to sleep. So I don't know if
Penny is a dog, so y'all know.
She did jump on me twice during the presentation. I was just kind of pushing her off camera the whole time. So
I love it.
I've gotten so used to presenting.
Certainly appreciate you sharing your vantage point as it relates to automation. I absolutely think you're right. There are many different degrees of automation, and people can be afraid of it. I know that we were talking earlier about me editing video. I kept putting it off because I didn't know how to do it. And as soon as I started doing it, I was like, this is fun. So you gotta, it's all about how you interpret it and you begin to utilize it, and you realize, you wonder, how did I ever get by without this before?
Totally.
So if we have any more questions, feel free to type them in. We do have a few people out in the audience still.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing I will say, just while we're waiting, is if you're not thinking of any questions now, but maybe 6 hours from now, you're just like, oh, how do I do the text messaging two-way thing that Matt was talking about? We do have an email address set up to help you guys answer those questions. So if you do have anything that comes to mind, even after the session ends today, if you send us an email at webinars@storable.com, we have a few people behind the scenes there that can kind of help track that down and get you connected with a specialist that can help you answer any of these questions. So feel free to send those in even after we conclude today. But it is 1:14, so I believe we're probably good to go, don't you think?
I'm just typing that email in right now.
You're very welcome, Travis.
I just spelled email wrong, so you'd think I'd know how to spell. Usually I do know how to spell, I just have my fingers on the wrong keys. All right, Matt, once again, I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Enjoy Austin, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
All right.
In person.
Thank you so much, guys.